Ukuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu kunomthelela omubi eNingizimu Afrika. Ezinye izifundazwe zibhekene nenkinga yokushoda kwamanzi ngenxa yesomiso, kanti ezinye zinemvula nezikhukhula ngenxa yokushintsha kwesimo sezulu. Eminyakeni emibili edlule, izimvula ezinamandla zadala umonakalo omkhulu esifundazweni saKwaZulu-Natal, zashiya izinkulungwane zemindeni dengwane, kwalahleka nemiphefumulo engaphezulu kuka-445. Lokhu kwadala umonakalo wabiza izigidigidi zamarandi kwingqalasizinda. Namhlanje mbukeli sibuza ukuthi uyazi ukuthi kuyini ukuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu, kanti futhi kudalwa yini? Inhlelo zokuxwayisa kusenesikhathi zingayisiza kanjani imiphakathi ukuthi ilungiselele izehlakalo zesimo sezulu esibi kakhulu? Mbukeli, sikubingelele sikwamukela ohlelweni Asikhulume Let's Talk. Igama lami ngingubongiwe uMakhumalo wakwaZwane. Sikukhumbuze ke mbukeli ukuthi ungaba ingxenye yalolu hlelo ngokushayela ucingo sizwe umbono noma umbuzo wakho. Inombolo zethu zocingo 011-714-0677 noma 011-714-0678. Ungabuye futhi uthole amakhasinethi okuxhumana ku-X @SABC Izindaba kanye na ku-Facebook SABC Izindaba. Ukuze kubelula ke mbukeli, sicela uqale ngo-#Asikhulume, #SABC News, bese ke ubhala umbuzo noma umbono wakho. Asikhulume. Mbukele esigamekweni sakamuva nje kushona abantu abayisithupha kulandela izikhukhula ezihlasele eMnambithi esifundazweni saKwaZulu-Natal ngobusuku obandulela uKhisimusi wonyaka ofile. Sikhumbuze ke mbukele ukuthi kuleli viki sibuza ukuthi ngabe uyazi ukuthi kuyini ukuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu nokuthi ngabe kudalwa yini, kanti futhi ngabe izinhlelo zokuxwayisa kusenesikhathi zingayisiza kanjani imiphakathi ukuze ilungiselele izehlakalo zesimo sezulu esibi kakhulu. Ake sizwe mbukele imbono yenu ukuthi ithini.
Anginalo ulwazi olungako ukuguquka kwesimo sezulu. Siyasibona ngoba abanye abanawo ama-TV, manje bagcina beba nezikhukhula, makunezikhukhula bengazi, kanti mhlawumbe ngabe bayayilungiselela before zizefike uma betshelwe
ulwazi nge-climate change, since I usually use my phone in order to know ukuthi i-weather izoba kanjani and everything, and ngibuka indaba ngikwazi ukubona ukuthi kuzowenzakalani kwi-weather.
Isimo sezulu sesiguquguquke kakhulu njengamanje since sekukhona ukufa kwama-ozone layer due to ama-factories nama-forestries nako konke ke nama-perfumes la angekho emabhodleleni la semathinini. Ikona uku-affecta kakhulu i-climate change njengoba sibona kushisa kanje namanje noma sekubanda futhi kanjalo kugcina sekubanda kakhulu ngehaba.
It's up to us to get together and solve these problems like pollution, carbon dioxide that's in the air and other stuff. Even amanzi emakhaya singawangcolisi silahle izinto phakathi, you know. We have a long way to go in being clean and keeping the environment safe. Wagcina nini nje ukubona i-butterfly?
I definitely think uMasipala, the town planners, the different disaster risk management teams can actually look into facilitating warnings for people.
Mbukele ukudingida kabanzi ngalokho asamukele ihambeli zethu uSolwazi Hangwelani Makidimisha Chipungu, a professor in town and regional planning at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, nodokotela Nomhle Ngwenya, an independent climate finance researcher, kanye noThandiwe Gumede, oyi-weather forecaster and meteorologist, a South African weather service. Nginamukele nonke, siyabonga isikhathi senu. Ngizoqala ngawe dokotela. Abantu bayibuza ukuthi njengoba sibalaleli nabalaleli okuningi ngathi abakwazi yini ukuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu?
So ukuguquguquka kwezulu, it's a natural thing. So into edaliwe vele. The only change is ukuthi thina as abantu with population growth and the emitting of carbon emissions, yithi sa accelerator ukuthi izulu vele lishintshe, so that we can have things like droughts and severe storms, etc. So it's a natural thing, but thina as abantu we've accelerated the rate of climate change and its impacts on society and the environment.
Prof, I wonder how much of that is true, because there's also the impact, like we're listening to Doc right now, that it seems that the human aspect of it, as she says, has also accelerated this.
Yes, I fully agree with her. The human aspect of it has accelerated that in a bigger way. the way in which we relate and interact with the environment has a lot to do with how actually the environment responds to us. And there are a number of factors associated with this in the way in which we design our cities or our lived environment or even our households. So there are a number of factors which we can discuss maybe as time goes on.
Tandiwe, someone is asking namhlanje ukuthi kanti yini lento esiyibonayo ngesimo sezulu esingaqondakali kodwa siqale ngokuthi sicuphise umbukeli. When we talk about climate change sikhuluma ngokuthi ukushisa kakhulu, imvula eningi, sikhuluma ngani kahle kahle?
Sisima sikhuluma ngokuguquka kwezulu noma nge-climate change njengoba uDoc ebeseke wathinta ekuthenini ngokwendalo umhlaba uyakwazi ukuthi uyipholise wona uphinde futhi uyifudumeze wona kodwa ngezizathu zokuthi umhlaba esiphila kuwona siya ngokuya sithembela kakhulu emshinini kunakudala lapho khona sasithembele kakhulu ekuthenini izinto zizenzela thina ngezandla zethu. Lokho kudala ukuthi kuba khona lama-gas angalungile akwazi ukuthi akubambe ukushisa ahlalayo la emoyeni wethu okwenza ukuthi sibone ukuthi amazinga ethu okushisa aya ngokuya ekhuphuka kunalokho okujwayelekile. Lokho-ke kusho ukuthini na isimo sezulu? Lokho kusho ukuthi sibona izinto ey'njengoma heat waves eya ngokuya anda lapho khona siba ney'nsuku ezishisa lokhu okungabekezeleleki. Kuphinde futhi lokho azi ukuthi ey'ndaweni lezi ezinomswakama noma iy'ndawo ezine-moisture i-capacity noma indlela i-atmosphere yethu ekwazi ukuthi ibambe ngayo le moisture iya ngokuya nayo ikhuphuka leyo capacity. Mayikhuphuka-ke i-capacity yokubamba i-moisture lokho kusho ukuthi ukuduma kwezulu noma amafa akwazi ukuthi asakhele lokho ukuduma kwezulu ukusilethela lezi imvula ey'lethe iy'khukhula umonakalo nazo ziya ngokuya zanda kwezinye iy'ndawo. Kodwa asigxile ekuthenini umlaleli angabambeleli ekuthenini kuphela noma umbukeli angabambeleli ekuthenini kuphela lesi simo sezulu silethe imvula. Kwezinye iy'ndawo ezomile namazinga okushisa akhuphukile kakhulu khona kulezo y'ndawo alethe isomiso. Isomiso kuyinto engayinhle kahle isibulalela imfuyo, isibulalela iy'tshalo zethu. Kuphinde futhi lapho kuthi mawukuthi sekomile kakhulu kulokho ekuqhubekile kushisa kakhulu kudala lokho ukuthi kube khona lemililo yequbula esiyibona yakheleka kwezinye iy'ndawo kube kukhona ukuthi siyinqande ilokho ibhebhethekile iy'nsuku ey'landelana.
Doc, listening to that and seeing what has been happening, it's very clear ukuthi kuba nomthelela in terms of the finances as well. And we often see municipalities struggling in this particular regard. Umbukeli-ke ubukile uyabuza ukuthi mina umasipala wami ngabe ukulungele kangakanani ukuthi ungisize if I'm facing these adverse weather patterns.
So ibalulekile lembuzo lena ngoba municipalities at the moment kunenkinga ye skills and expertise. So even if umasipala angaba nemali to allocate those funds to umphakathi that's been affected by imvula or drought is another issue. So we really need to focus on, the skills and expertise. Do municipalities at a municipal level, do we have the skills and expertise to allocate certain funds, to help with disaster risk management issues? So, umuntu obukele lapho, in an impacted community, the first thing we must, engage with is also our municipalities engaging nomphakathi wakhona. Bayaxhumanisa, in terms of what are the needs at that time? What is the community impacted by? For example, if, kunemvula eyenzekayo and, umphakathi uhleli by a riverbank, obviously they'll be the first impacted. Their houses will be swamped away. Is there emergency funds to ensure ukuthi, izindlu zikhona ziwakhiwe, just in case to provide that temporary relief? So it's a mixture of skills and expertise, but also readiness, preparedness. We are very much, very reactive. We are not proactive. And it's very important ukuthi municipalities balogo baxhumanisa with the communities in order to ensure that there is preparedness in case of, ukushisa okukhulu or imvula ezayo.
Prof, one of the things that is clear, listening to Udoc, I mean, the building on the flood lines is in itself a problem, but are the early warning systems working?
Yeah, so early warning system will only work if you're there. And the question is, do we have the early warning system at the moment? That is questionable. In some instances, we do have early warning systems which are not working. Some of them, they are not working. But I think the issue around the riverbed and floodplain, what we call a floodplain, it's a bigger one because it's something that we can actually control, right?
Yeah.
So we have in municipality space or in town planning space what we call development control, right? So if you do developmental control or development control, obviously you will be discouraging people to be sitting on or staying on those areas, and that is not happening. We are not discouraging people to build along those lines, and it's a problem on its own. So the question is, to what extent are we doing development control, and to what extent are people educated around that? Because you will find that in a number of places where we're experiencing flooding, especially in KZN, people, they're experiencing flooding, their houses are being broken down into pieces, and later on they come back again to the same place.
Yeah.
Build again, to rebuild again. So that is a sign again of a bigger problem, to say the education is not done enough, and it has to be done at an early stage. So if we want to talk about issues around a floodplain and who's supposed to be there, we should emphasize issues of education, but also of development control.
That's quite interesting, especially because you see sometimes people becoming warned, but then they choose to continue and go back into these particular areas. Very briefly, Thandi, when about 20 seconds then before we go to the break, do we then see lama patterns kwesimo sezulu eqhubeka into the future?
Yebo sisi, lama patterns siyabona ukuthi ayaqhubeka. Even igagulo zethu lokho sithi ama-seasonal forecast esinawo in place right now akhombisa ukuthi amazinga ethu okushisa singawalindele ey'nyangeni ey'landelayo angaphezu kwalokho okujwayelekile. Uma sikhuluma ngamazinga okushisa, sikhuluma ngamazinga okushisa phansi, which are minimum temperatures, namazinga okushisa aphezulu kwama-maximum temperatures. Kodwa futhi okusixaka kakhulu njengamanje njengoba bengiye ngasho ngathi sike sigxile kakhulu kuyikhukhula, singabe sisagxila kakhulu kwisomiso. Iy'mvula zethu kagula kwazo kuveza ukuthi siyela lapho khona singalindela iy'mvula ezingaphansi kwalokho esiyijwayele.
Okay, sizoke sikhulume ngalokho masibuya nokuthi amazinga ethu okushisa ama-city, they are abnormal. What are we talking about? Ukuthi umbukeli naye azi nokuthi how do you stay safe. Umbukeli ake sithi shelele itolo siyabuya. Mbukeli, ake siqhubeke nokubheka ukuthi isimo sezulu esiguquguqukayo sibangwa yini, kanti futhi mina nawe singayivikela kanjani from that particular impact. Sisehleli nehambeli zethu. Doc, I'm going to come to you because one of the things that we are seeing ukuthi umongameli has set up what he calls a climate change response fund. Kodwa abantu bayibuza ngoba sike sabona ne-advisory council futhi abantu bathi lokhu kuyakhulunywa phezulu kodwa siyabona umthelela noma ama-results on the ground.
So I think the very important thing about what President Ramaphosa mentioned in his Sona speech is that this climate change response fund, the unique thing about it is that government is now realizing the importance of establishing a fund and engaging with both government and private sector to address the needs of the communities that are impacted by imvula and droughts, etc., as we've seen. So this is one of its first kind in terms of this is us now being not only reactive but proactive for the future as well. And more details are going to be unraveled as regarding the fund. But the important thing is Prof touched earlier on early warning monitoring systems. And this is something that we are going to start seeing. But as I said, kubalulekile ukuthi siloko sixhumanisa with the communities. What are also igolo and imfundo zakhona saying about, for example, Usis Tandega mentioned from the South African Weather Services, how are we also communicating and sifundisa abantwana around if there's a yellow warning, what does it mean? And maybe ukuthi uhambe kwenye indawo ungathathi le bridge le ojwayele ukuyithatha moya esikolweni umubuye esikolweni, like that sort of communication. So there is a lot that is still going to be unraveled of the climate change fund, but it is well received because government is now realizing ukuthi the impacts of lokushisa and imvula is now having a direct impacts not only on the economy but kumphakathi as a whole.
Quite interesting. And Prof, before I go back to Thandiwe, the province of KwaZulu-Natal has had such a, a serious impact when it comes to the flooding and what we've seen happen and the damage to infrastructure. But would you say right now, given what the province has gone through, it is well prepared to deal with potential future disasters?
It's very hard to say they are well prepared because preparedness is there are a number of stages that one will need to look at it. What I can say is that the province has gone through a lot and it's finding it very difficult to fight back the issues or the impact of disaster, especially flooding as it's concerned. Because as they are trying to recover from the previous flood, then the other flooding is coming. So in other words, they're chasing more what they call emergency cases than actually fixing the problem. So I'm not convinced that we are entirely ready. If you go around and drive around within the city of Durban and even other parts of the province, you still find that the infrastructure is still not up to date. Some of the areas are not yet fixed. And that's on its own is a problem. But also, I think what we also need to talk about when we want to talk about communities and the infrastructure is also the role of the communities to some extent, to say, what is it that community need to do? Of course, there's a lot of lists that I can put forward right now of what the municipalities need to do. But we also need to start talking about the initiatives which the cities, the official, the communities themselves needs to take cognizance. The way in which we interact with the waste is important. If you go and take a drive right now in the city of Durban, you will see in the downtown a lot of waste, plastics, tins all over. The question is, why are people throwing things all over when there are areas where they are supposed to be throwing those waste? And I think we need to start giving some education around that to say the way in which we interact with our waste, the way in which we interact or we dispose of our waste, it matters and it does have a negative impact in our environment and in our infrastructure because our drainage system, they simply cannot cope.
So Thandiwe, asikhulume ngokuthi umbukeli ubona kanjani ngoba kwesinye isikhathi uyangena mhlambe ku website wenu noma umasipala uthi kuyena kune level 2 kune level 3 yama floods. Sazi kanjani ukuthi yini umehluko lapho?
Okay, sisi lapho mhlambe singayiqala la ekuthenini kuthe sesibona ukuthi isimo sezulu siya ngokuya siguquguquka nemvula zethu ziya ngokuya zanda and the impacts are also increasing and these events are becoming quite frequent as Prof has already mentioned that once you start recovering from the other flood another event comes through. So then we decided that no, there has to be a shift in the paradigm there because there seems to be a miscommunication somewhere regarding the alerts that we are disseminating out to the public. Sashintsha sabona ukuthi no gathi manje sikhuluma sodwa masithi sixwayisa imphakathi yakithi kanti umsebenzi we-early warning system ukuthi uxwayisa umphakathi ukuze sizame ukuthi sisindise impilo zabantu ukuze sizame ukuthi sehlise umonakalo ongadaleka. Sa-introduce lento esithi impact-based severe weather forecasting system. Lapho khona esikhuluma ukuthi isimo sezulu esisilindele sizoba namuphi umthelela empilweni zethu. Sizoba namuphi umthelela empahleni yethu nakwingqalasizinda. On the impact-based severe weather forecasting system, we use the colors, various colors to try and make it easy for the public. Siphinde futhi sizame ukuthi sisebenzise ulimi olula umbukeli azokwazi ukuthi aliqonde kalula. Siphinde futhi sisebenzise nezigaba. We have stages or rather we have levels from level 1 to level 10. Prof touched a bit on when we issue out these levels as well as the colors. There seems to be still a gap there regarding the understanding of what actually these colors and these levels actually mean to the public. So briefly, today I'll just touch on what exactly they mean. First of all, from level 1 to level 2, we're talking about minor impacts that can result from whichever severe weather that is anticipated. In these minor impacts, level 1 just means that there is a medium likelihood that these minor impacts can occur. And level 2 means that there's a higher likelihood that these minor impacts can occur. If we say minor impacts, we do not necessarily mean that whatever a scenario that is going to come will not result in any damage, but we mean that there will be a localized damage. So if we're forecasting for the whole province of KwaZulu-Natal and we only get the damage in one city, for example, Durban, that is a localized impact in our case. It does not mean that the impact in an extent is localized, but the area at which this impact was experienced is quite localized if we compare to the bigger picture. Secondly, the minor impacts refer to the fact that there will not be a strain on the emergency responders because they're only attending to a smaller area as compared to if the whole province is struck by that particular disaster. The yellow alerts continue into level 3, going up to level 4. However, the difference between 1 and 2, as well as 3 and 4, is that level 3 and 4 are now looking at significant impacts. Significant impacts, that's where we start looking at a wider area or a broader area with regards to areas that might be affected. That's where we start looking at this significant impact might cause some disruptions and a strain in the emergency services responding as fast as they would if we had a level 1 and a level 2. Then furthermore, beyond level 4, it goes up to an orange color now. We start introducing the orange color, which is from level 5 up until level 9. But I'll start with level 5 and 6. Level 5 and 6 are still dealing with the significant impacts.
Pardon me, I think we need to just take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue with that, and you can just give us just a little bit more on, very briefly then, on what these systems mean. Ngoba mbukeli la ukhona uzowabona lama systems kodwa kufanele wazi ukuthi achaza ukuthini nokuthi wazi ukuthi uthola kanjani usizo, njengoba noDoc beseshilo la ukuthi kubalulekile ukuthi mina nawe sazi ukuthi yini esifundayo, yini esibonayo. Umasipala futhi mangaba ukwazi ukusiza thina sifunda ini. Ake sisishele itolo mbukeli siyabuya khona manje. Mbukeli sesiphetha ke sibuke ukuthi is it too late to reverse the effects of climate change, kanti sibuke futhi nokuthi ihambele zethu zithi yini esingayenza ukuya phambili ukuthi sikwazi ukuthi mina nawe sisizakale. Doc, I'm going to come to you before I go back to Uthandiwe to wrap us up. No, Prof, let's look for you, you know, when it comes to where we are, can we reverse the impact? What do we do to limit the impact going forward?
So, sisibalekile lembuzo lo, because one, can we reverse the impact? No. So climate change is ongoing, and as you know, in Shilo, at the beginning, with rapid development, rapid population growth, this is something that's irreversible. But we can control how impactful it can be in the future. Second of all, what can we do? Things like, you know, there's a whole, especially on a country level, you know, in terms of the green transition. So looking towards greener sources of, you know, energy. So for example, instead of, you know, and simple things, ekhaya for umuntu, you know, ohleli ekhaya, ucima, you know, ibane, monga sebenzis, you know, things like, you know, looking for, you know, cheaper EV bulbs, etc., you know, that limits carbon emissions. So that's more on a personal human level. But on a country level, what we can do is really focus on the green transition. But also green transition is very important because, as we all know, coal is still very much dominant in our country. So we also need to be, you know, mindful, Uguti, as we transition away from, you know, as they say, dirtier sources of fuel, Uguti, must be mindful, Uguti, and there's also education, imfundo, as to what does green mean for them. So those are two very important things.
And quite interesting, and I hope the next time you visit us, we talk about the impact of this green, you know, economy. It's the economy, it's the climate, it's everything. What does it mean then to go green in full? But Prof, final word from you then. From a regional and town planning perspective, what do we do to minimize the impact?
Yeah, so from town planning perspective, there are a number of things that we need to do to minimize the impact. And one of it is what Doc had already said earlier on, to say we need to go green. So what we're saying is that we need to create what we call carbon sinks, right? So this is where we leave open spaces within urban environment and within every design that we come up with. So when you leave those open spaces, they act as a carbon sink. That's one. The other thing, we need to also pay attention to the way in which we design our cities. We want to design what we call compact cities. So in other words, people, they need to actually walk than actually using their cars in order to deal with the issues of carbon emission, which we find in our atmosphere. So that's one thing we can also do. But the other thing that we also need to do is developmental control, like I've said earlier on. We need monitoring where people are developing their houses, where people are staying, and how people are interacting with the environment. Lastly, but not least, is the issue around allocation of land, right? So we need to start allocating land, actually what we call strategic located land, where people they were able to build the houses, because it does not help to sit here to say don't build on the floodplain when actually people that do not have land to build their houses. So we need to start working on all of those issues and many more.
Quite interesting. Thandi, we're in about 30 seconds from your point then. Let's talk about these systems. Ukuthi sithatha serious kangakanani nokuthi uthini kumbukeli namhlanje obukile ofuna ukwazi kakhulu.
Isingasho sisukuthi nje kumbukeli ofuna ukwazi ama-systems abaluleke kakhulu ababukeli siyacela ukuthi balalele kumsakazo yabo babone kumabonakude wabo abanazo iy'nkundla zokuxhumana nakhona kubalula lapho ngoba abantu ba-reporter easily using social media kodwa okubalulekile singakusho kumbukeli today ukuthi ama-severe weather events azoya ngokuya anda njengoba siwabona enzeka makuwukuthi thina asi-equiphi njengababukeli nge-information sazi ukuthi makuthiwa kukhulunywa ngalento kukhulunywa ngani yona yiphi indlela engingayiphephisa ngayo ngoba mawabuka noma uyibuka izixwayiso zethu kukhona nalapho ekugcineni kuzona ukuke kushiwo khona ukuthi iyona yiphi indlela what are the necessary precautions that you can take for this upcoming weather event that we are anticipating.
Let me thank you all because this has been very informative, even for me as well, because there's so much that we still don't know and we still need to understand as far as this issue yokuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu is concerned. Mbukeli, siyethemba ukuthi nawe ufundile kuningi uzokwazi ukuthi nawe uyiphephise. Ake sibonge futhi kuyihambeli zethu kanye nakuwe mbukeli ukuthi uhlanganyele nathi. Ihambeli zethu uSolwazi Hangwerani Makidimisha Chipungu, a professor in town and regional planning at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Udokotela unomhlengwenya, an independent climate finance researcher, noThandiwe Gumede, a weather forecaster and meteorologist, a South African Weather Service. Umakhumula wakwaZwane kanye nethimba le Asikhulume sithi ayixabene niphephe.